Hello and welcome Gen Con 2019 attendants. I am Mike Turian, and we are live here today to talk about the joy of Cube Draft. I wanted to start with a quick question for our audience. How many of you here have built your own cube? Looks like maybe 75, 80% of you. And how many of you regularly cube draft? Pretty much everyone. Well, yeah. That's wonderful. That's great because today is all about cube draft. What makes it fun? What makes it exciting? We're going to be talking about some fun insider tips and tricks as well. And so I want to start off first by introducing me. That's right. We'll start with the most important person first. I'm Mike Turian. I'm a principal product designer at Wizards of the Coast. I've been there since 2004, and I've gotten to design lots of awesome Magic cards, including cards that you would love in your cube, such as Jace the Mind Sculptor. Recently, I was super excited to design Rotting Regisaur, and it's a very rare for me when I submitted card design and the team actually makes it more powerful. But that's actually what happened. I submitted it as a 6/6 and they powered it up to 7/6. So when you're killing your opponent in just 3 swings, don't blame that on me. Sitting next to me, Matt Kranstuber. Matt, tell us about yourself.
So I'm Matt Kranstuber. I'm a Columbus native in resident cube nut. I've been playing and building and designing not cards, but cubes for about 10 years, and I've had a podcast. I've written for several of the large Magic websites, and I think at my highest count, I had 7 cubes. I had to go back and re-look at that, and now I only have 2. But yeah, I'm just nuts about cube. Never met a cube I didn't like. That's really important.
That's good. Great, thanks, Matt. Next to Matt, we have Justin Parnell. Justin.
Yes, so I'm Justin Parnell. I am the acquisitions manager at StarCityGames.com, where I have previously written cube content for about 4 years. I don't generally make content for cube anymore, but I did design the SCG Winter Cube for our SCG Con Winter last year, where we had qualifier tournaments to play for that. So that was something I've really been trying to do to promote cube from within, kind of on the inside. I started cubing in 2008, and I would say that my favorite way to cube is to rotisserie draft. So, has anyone ever rotisserie drafted a cube? Want to? Yeah. All right. Excellent. So.
Well, the person next to you raised his hand very proudly as soon as you asked about that. It's our very own Gavin Burr. Welcome, Gavin.
Oh, hello. I didn't see you there. Hi, my name is Gavin Verhey. I am a senior game designer and product architect over at Wizards of the Coast. So my job is to actually design these wild and wacky cards that we all love playing with so much. I've worked on a lot of these ancillary sets, which are usually a great way to get cards into cubes. It kind of lets you build things a little outside the normal power level or normal level of sanity. And so I worked on Battle Bond, a lot of the commander sets. And I put up a couple cards there I've designed which have made their way into Minia Cube, Monastery Mentor, and Spell Seeker, 2 cards that I'm very proud of. But you can also list cards like Siege Rhino, Arena Rector, or if you're into conspiracies, which we'll get into a little bit, World Knit, one of my personal favorites. This is my 10th Gen Con, so I've been doing this for 10 times, I guess. And a little fact a lot of people don't know about me, actually, is, so you might know me now as like, oh, that's the Wizards guy, that's Gavin, whatever. But in the days before that, I was actually one of the people that helped propagate Cube online. Like I helped bring the community and build the community up on various websites, on various forums, from an article that Tom Lapelli originally wrote. And then I kind of created on some of the most popular Magic forums, like little groups to talk about Cube, and it all really expanded from there. In Seattle, I was the first person, at least as far as I know, to have a cube. And there's a point where 2 to 3 times a week, people would come over to my house and we would all cube draft. And it was like we're going over to Gavin's place, we're playing his cube, and that's how that idea kind of generated in Seattle. And now I'm so lazy, like I could go to 10 different friends' houses on any given night and probably play cube in Seattle if I wanted to. But it was kind of cool being the first, right? People coming over to your house and they're like, oh my gosh, can I get on the invite list for Gavin's cube drafts? And it felt very important. I got to maintain like a MySpace style top 8 list of who I wanted at my cube drafts. It was a really good time.
Well, I'm glad, unlike MySpace, Gavin is still working on Magic cards and still.
MySpace never worked on Magic cards. I'll
Yeah,
tell you that
well,
much.
It's still, yeah.
Another thing in that vein too is we, of course, put cubes online. Legacy Cube is on Magic Online right now, for example. You can go and draft it if you fire up your browser. And sometimes I'll be looped in to play test or look at those cubes too. So also from a design perspective, I'm thinking about Cube Draft.
Great, thanks, Gavin. Okay, so the agenda for today is basically I'm going to be tossing up a topic, and then our panelists are going to be jumping right into that. So what's a better place to start than getting started? Matt, tell me about how you got started with Cube, how you fell in love with it.
Sure, yeah. So I've always been a big drafter, so ever since my first time firing up a draft in Mercadian Mass Block, fell in love with Limited and never really had the concept of a cube until I saw at a PTQ one time, I think Tom Lapilli had his cube, and I got to see all these crazy cards that were mashed up together, and it was just this odd concept, but I kind of filed it away, didn't do anything with it, until a friend, Eric, he went over to Afghanistan, and he had a cube, he left it for us, and in between us playtesting for PTQs and drafts, we would play this cube, and it started to get to a point where I just didn't even want to play any other formats, I just wanted the cube, and so I started slowly picking the cards up and building it out from there.
Awesome. What about you, Justin? What was your experience like?
I feel like there's going to be a common name that all of us have say. These two have already said it, but so I first started, I cubed for the first time at some random Grand Prix. I think it was, I don't even know what Grand Prix it was, in 2008. And I love Limited. Ultimately, I love Limited more than Constructed. It's my favorite way to play Magic. And I was invited to do this draft. I didn't know what it was. Just was like, hey, come do this draft with us. It's like a crazy draft. It's like there's all different cards for Magic. And I was like, I don't no idea what you're talking about. So I go draft, and it's this person I've never met. And still to this day, I have no idea who this person was who owned the cube. It's just like this mysterious figure that had this profound impact on my Magic career that vanishes after the 3-hour cube that we played.
It's actually you from the future.
It might have been.
Like your life is all about cube. We must come back and make sure that we set the timeline correct.
So I do this cube draft, and as soon as I open the first pack, it's just like, this is the greatest thing I've ever done, Magic-wise, in my entire life. So I finish this cube, and immediately I go home and try to find as much information on it, and of course I find articles from Tom Lapilli, just like all of us have said. Mention his name, and literally get as much information on it as I can and start to build my own cube, which I finally finished, a 540 card powered cube in early 2009, right around when Conflux came out. And since then, for the next 3 or 4 years, exclusively I would go to events and not play in events, only to cube. I'd go to Grand Prix, I would go to SCG events, I would go to PTQs. I didn't even care about playing regular Magic anymore. I just wanted to cube. That was consumed my Magic playing time. And since then, it's just I've been able to watch this format grow, not as much as a player perspective, because I think Magic Online has a lot to do with that, but at least from an awareness perspective. And it's so great to be able to when I started playing Cube 10 years ago, I'd never imagined that in 10 years I'd be on a panel at Gen Con talking about Cube. So this is just this format in general, it just means so much to me, and that first pack that I opened is really just what did it for me for the rest of my time playing Magic and cubing.
Awesome. And Gavin, you kind of hit on some of those early Cube stories. What about when you were thinking about the first time you were thinking about designing cards for Cube? What was that like for you?
Yeah, well, making a card hit in Cube is really tricky because cubes in general, we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but in general, cubes are an amalgamation of the most powerful cards in all of Magic. So when you're going to make a card for Cube, it has to be as strong as the most powerful cards in the entire game. But there's a few other things you can do. First of all, there's some things that are specifically good in Cube Draft that are not good in other formats. To me, a great example is Shelldock Isle, not a card I designed, but this is a card that doesn't get played in Commander, saw minimal standard play. It's a land that hideaways, it's the blue hideaway land, so you look at your top 4 cards, put a card underneath it, and then if your deck is 20 or fewer cards, you can cast the card under it for free. Now normally 60 cards, hard to get there, but in Cube, when you've got a 40 card deck, and it's very powerful. And you can play a spell like, I don't know, let's say Upheaval, for free. That can go a really long way. So that's one way that we get there. And so a great example is a card like Arena Rector, where I made it. It's like, well, it's not really going to be strong enough for Legacy. And I've seen a little bit of Legacy play, certainly.
Big fit action.
Yeah. But mostly it's like, okay, cubes have a lot of planeswalkers. They love, kind of interesting archetypes. There's like a black-white sacrifice stack in a lot of cubes, or even, a green-white-black sacrifice. And with a lot of planeswalkers around, this is an incredibly powerful card. So Cube lets you take some cards that aren't quite there for a Legacy format, or necessarily even a Commander format, and give them somewhere to live. And I find that as someone who designs a lot for Commander, there's a lot of great overlap between those two genres because they both have the same trouble. They're both trying to compete with the history of Magic cards, and you're trying to make cards that are strong in those formats but don't break Legacy. So it's, every now and then you end up with a true name nemesis, but for the most part, you stay in pretty good shape.
So, Gavin, I'm just curious, when you design a product like Commander, like the set that's about to come out here.
Oh yeah, it's a sweet one.
Do you think about like, what if we tweak this a little bit and maybe put it in the context of Cube, in the same way that you put cards in the context of Commander or Standard or Legacy?
Absolutely. In general, my design rule is if you can make something better for a format and not hurt other formats, you should just do it most of the time.
It's a good rule.
There are some exceptions, but in general, like a great example, not for Cube, but in Standard, if we're making, recently in Core Set 2020, we had these 5 3-color legendary creatures, like Kaikar and things of that ilk. Well, for a little while, they weren't legendary, but then it's like, wait a second, we make them legendary, that's basically just all upside. Like, yes, occasionally you'll be building your Standard deck, you can't have 2 in play at the same time, et cetera, but in general, like, it's awesome just to be able to have 5 sweet new wedge commanders to play with.
Yeah.
So when I'm working on a commander set, it's like, okay, this card's going to be good in commander. Commander is very not rate sensitive. Whether a card costs 2 or 3 mana a lot of the times is like kind of inconsequential. So I'll be like, okay, if it's not going to hurt Legacy, let's just take it down a peg, make it cost 1 less mana, and it'll get hit. Actually, there's a few cards I didn't do that for, and I regret both of them. So the 2 cards that I wish I left at 1 mana cheaper were Turn Timber Sower from Commander 2018. This was the 3 mana 3/3. When a land goes into your graveyard from anywhere, you make a 0/1 token, and you can sacrifice 3 tokens to get a land back. If that was 2 mana, I think that might have hit Cube. And then my personal pet card, Dramatic Reversal, which is a 4 mana card that says if you would lose the game this turn, instead you go to 1 and you draw 7 cards. It was 3 mana for a really long time, and I think it might have gotten there in Cube at 3 mana, and at 4 it's just a little bit too much. So whenever I don't do this, I always feel like I should have. I like making cards better for Cube where possible. And I will say, C19 definitely has a few cards to consider. We saw Carrick yesterday, which
we talked about that before the panel started.
Yeah, that's a hot one.
Great, thanks guys. So the next topic we had to talk about was joy, right? I think one of the things that I always see that very common, much like the Dungeon Master in D&D, it's like, you ahead of time, you're putting in the work, right? You're cultivating that cube, right? And really it's about, the joy that you're bringing the 7 other people that are going to come and draft with you. Of course, you're going to experience joy too, but let's start with Justin this time. Justin, talk to me about joy and the different ways that you bring joy into cube drafting.
So, whenever I think of it, so the name of the panel is The Joy of Cube Drafting, which is, I maybe Matt wasn't going to say it, but consequently also the name of one of his Cube podcast, The Joy of Cubing. It is, as I talked about when we were kind of doing the introductions, like, the best thing that I can see, I love to see that moment when somebody cubes for the first time and then they're hooked. Because that happened to me. Like, I talked about, like, when I opened that first pack, but when people cube for the first time and they're like, this is fantastic, and then they start to think about the possibilities of, wait, this cube has these cards, what if I just make mine with all of my favorite cards? And then when people get to that level, they're just like, this can be almost whatever I wanted. And I think, like, I haven't designed as many cubes as Matt has, or obviously designed cards for cube like Gavin has, but I have cultivated my cube in such a way that I just want to make sure that everybody is having the best possible time. And sometimes that means creating archetypes within the cube that are going to just create moments that make people have fun, or having the decision between like opening a pack and seeing like 3 of these cards are the best card in the pack, but I can only pick 1 of them, and those moments, watching people have those moments. Sometimes when I'm cubing, I just like to watch other people and just like see their reactions and like see people open packs and be like and make all of these like they're frustrated because they can't pick everything, but they're excited, and that's like, to me, the excitement of being able to play with the history of Magic. And the way that you see it, not just the history of Magic, like if Magic for you didn't start at Alpha or Beta, like I started playing Magic in 1999. I started playing like right between like 6th edition Urza's Legacy, right? So to me, that nostalgia hits a lot harder, but a lot of people started in Zendikar or started in Kaladesh. And you can create a cube to bring yourself that joy and your playgroup that same joy that you experienced when you first did it. And I think that is my favorite thing about Cube, honestly, is being able to experience it with the people. And I've cubed on Magic Online, but I don't think that there's any replacement for cubing with 5 other people or 7 other people in real life. It's the most fun you can have playing Magic.
I mean, whenever I cube draft, I always feel like it's going to go see all my old friends. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
Mystic Snake, you're here. What's up, buddy? Or, Call the Herd. Yeah, let's hang out. I remember the good old days. I mean, my cube, I didn't tell my origin story, but my cube started with Masticore. I traded for a Masticore because I heard it was so powerful. Holy smokes, this card's Masticore. And then I very quickly learned it was unplayable in everything, because we were past that time. I started in Invasion, rotated out of Standard, wasn't going to play anywhere else, and I'm like, what am I going to do with this Masticore? So it just was in my binder forever. When I heard about this cube thing, I was like, finally a place I could use my Masticore, and I was able to put in all these old cards into my cube and get to experience them for the first time. And so now I've got these great memories of cards that I never got to play with originally, and cards that since I've grown to love. And so, it feels like you're coming back and puts a smile on my face as both I re-experience my favorite cards and newer players try them for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, and the cube is a reflection of not just the things that you find exciting about Magic, but also your cube group.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
and
for
so,
sure.
If your group tends to lean a certain direction, right? Maybe they're really degenerate and they love to see lots of combos and lots of ridiculous game moments. You'll design your cube, that way it'll just naturally happen. Someone will say, "Hey, you should add channel," or "Hey, you should put Eureka in there."
What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah,
Eureka channel,
right?
It's gonna be fine, right?
And I'll just, you guys have already kind of touched on it, but obviously my cube group is the best cube group in the world, hands down. They've kept me sane through the years. Every Tuesday night we get together, we play, and they're also my guinea pigs. So when I have a crazy idea, they'll be there to try it out and tell me how stupid I am. And but I've also been able to meet people like Justin and you guys, and I have friends that at Solely Singleton podcast and the Third Power podcast that I talk to daily. Right, we have threads, and we just geek out on Cube, and it's just a great community. It brings us together, right? Mm-hmm. So I love that about it, that it's local, but it's also global like that.
Yeah. Can I jump back in before we move on?
You're
the boss, thank you.
I'll allow it.
So, I don't know where to try to fit this into what I was saying, so I'm just going to be messy about it. Have you ever drafted anything, any format? Like, what is any? Someone name out a draft format, like a booster pack format. That's your favorite. Conspiracy, great.
Good choice.
So, you ever drafted a deck in Conspiracy, and you're like, this is the greatest limited deck I've ever had. I want this deck. I want to carry this deck with me, and I want to play this deck every time I play Conspiracy. But you can't, because that's not how Booster Draft Limited works all the time. Cube, you can do that. It doesn't have to be. It's not about power level. Some people, make it about power level sometimes. But if you can make this environment to where you have these exact experiences that you're trying to replicate. You're going to make that awesome Conspiracy deck. All those cards are in the cube. You're going to make this awesome, my favorite limited format, which is Time Spiral. I think it's also Gavin's. You want to have all of these crazy archetypes from Time Spiral? Make a Time Spiral cube. And it's just limitless possibilities.
Yeah, for me, I love draft. It's because it's different every time.
Yeah.
But also, it's kind of a lower power level. Even with like a Modern Horizon set, it's kind of a lower power level. I like Constructed because you get to build your own deck and play with all these really powerful, awesome cards. but it gets repetitive after a while. You're playing the same matchups, the same archetypes. Cube is this perfect strata in the middle where you're basically drafting a constructed deck. So it's different every time, but the power level is still really high, or at least the synergy is still really high. And to me, that really separates it out from other formats. No matter what kind of cube you're going for, that's how I feel. You know that the person's curated it, and it's as good as possible. You're not going to have a lot of demystifies or whatever running around, you know? It's going to be great. So.
Awesome.
Joy.
Yes.
Joy.
That is joy, right? And I think, you know, just watching these guys talk about it, you really capture the joy of what Cube Draft can bring to you. So the next topic I wanted to hit on was tips and tricks, right? Everyone here is looking to build a better cube. So, Matt, what are some things that you found when building your cube really work out well for you?
Yeah, so I think my best sounding board is my cube group. So when we get together before we draft, I'll usually have things either color sorted as, you know, cards need to come in, and ask questions, right? What do you think about this new card from M20? What do you think if I added this archetype? And sometimes you'll get resistance like, that doesn't seem great. If there's not enthusiasm that way, I'm not excited about it. If someone says that's terrible, then I can see it as a challenge. But I think using your cube group as a sounding board is great. And then, of course, there's a swath of resources out there. There's stuff on the mothership. There's stuff on Reddit. There's, you know, all these, you know, Star City and cool stuff. There's all this cube content out there that you can consume that will, you know, bring you ideas that you wouldn't have otherwise come up with, I think.
Great. What about you, Justin? What are some things that you found out that have worked really well for you?
So, for me, one of the things that I always try to keep in mind when I'm changing my cube or trying to, you know, add cards, cut cards, etc., is that I am generally, in my play group, I'm the person that owns the cube. Now, there's, you know, at this point in time, there's a couple other people that I play with on a frequent basis that have cubes too, but I have the longest standing cube and the one that we generally play the most. So I always have to keep in mind that the cube, as much as I'm the owner, and it means the most to me, perhaps, but it's not just for me. So all of you cube owners out there, here in the audience, and obviously on watching on Twitch, you know, you have 5 other people, 6 other people, 7 other people, 10 other people that you cube with on a regular basis. And even if you love something or hate something and your play group feels differently, you have to take that into consideration. And that's something that I feel like is the most difficult thing for cube owners to realize, because you might love this strategy. Maybe you love, I'll say my most personally hated strategy, which is mill. You love to mill people. You just love it. It's your favorite thing. And every single every other person in your playgroup hates mill. They all hate it. So you have this cube, you have mill in your cube, and that specific archetype is not a fun experience, and it's something that you have to consider when building your cube. Maybe that's not something that should be present if it's not getting drafted, even from just a playing perspective. If you see these cards going 13th, 14th, 15th pick in the draft, even though you love it, you have to keep that into consideration. And likewise, if there's a strategy maybe you don't like, everyone else loves, maybe it's time to consider those things and potentially add those to the cube as well. Because again, it is more about community, especially with your immediate community, so much that I think sometimes cube owners kind of focus on what they love, and of course as they should, but what they love above everyone else. And I think sometimes that makes people kind of lose sight of, in my opinion, what is like the most important thing, which is playing with other people.
And that's really where the game design comes in, right? I mean, building a cube is really not unlike building a Magic set. It's very similar to how we build our master sets in a lot of ways. You want to create a great draft experience. And if everyone else likes something, even if you don't, well, maybe you should be including that in your cube, right? And we're there to spark that joy. Absolutely.
Exactly.
But within reason. If your playgroup all loves land destruction, maybe you should find a different playgroup, though. That's an idea. Something that I think really leveled up one of my favorite cubes to play. So I've got a friend in Seattle. Her name is Natalie Weisenbaum. You can find her on Twitter at Next3. And she has run a weekly modern cube draft in Seattle for, I don't know, 7, 8 years, something like that. She actually helped design the Magic Online Modern Cube. When that came out, we called her in specifically to do that. And when I went over to her house for the first time to draft this, I drafted my deck. Everything went well. And then at the end of it, she handed me a sheet. And I was like, ooh, homework, I'm so excited. And what it was is you wrote down your record, your colors, and the breakdown of the colors that you play, and a few other pieces of data, basically. And then she tracked it all in a spreadsheet, and over time saw which colors were winning more than others, how often certain colors were getting played, et cetera, to be able to hone her cube into being one of the most tuned cubes I've played in my entire life. And while it sounds like a little onerous to carry around this extra data with you, it's actually super easy. It took me maybe less than 5 minutes to fill the sheet out, and then she's able to just track everything that's ever happened in her cube that way and make really great decisions based on it. So she has like the color fixin broken down. She's got like Orzhov's signet, or there's one of the signets. It's like, yeah, that's the only signet in the cube because I ran the math, and this is the color that needed the ramp the most to support these cards and whatever. And it looks a little weird, but it plays super good. And so I just would recommend collecting a little bit of data. And that's also, talking about set design, that's how we build our sets. After we draft a cube or a master set or anything like that, we collect data on who won, what colors did you play, and et cetera, stuff in that range. So it goes a really long way toward crafting down that set, which once again is what a cube is.
So Gavin, when are you guys gonna put an API out there that allow us to download some of that play data from the Magic Online cube?
That's
and on to the next subject.
No, we were joking before this that, you know, probably one run of the Magic Online cube has more data points or more runs than probably Justin and my cube
combined
lifetime,
ever.
Right? So I think there's something to be said for being able to collect data points and make informed decisions off of them. But I'd also say that there's the other side of the coin where something doesn't feel like it works, right? And that's more, you know, when you have that kind of normative, like, yeah, it's good, right? Sort of Fire and Ice is good, but it doesn't feel right. Or I don't like losing to Sulfuric Vortex, even though it's in the winningest decks. And that's, again, that where you have your cube group as the sounding board to give you that feedback. Or you could just say, like, man, you know, these two guys or gals left miserable. I should probably look into maybe seeing if I could change that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one piece of data that you can't just track from a spreadsheet very easily is fun.
Yeah.
So no matter how much data I give you, at the end of the day, keeping track of your players' fun, especially in those in-person drafts,
I mean, you could
really
keep tick marks on Hemdatorak or something every time you cast it, or Mind Twist. Like,
my favorite thing in Natalie's cube is
that fun or not fun?
Not fun. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
My favorite thing on Natalie's cube is on her packs. She's got Skull and Crossbones, and every time you forget to pay your pack or you lose because you couldn't pay your pack, you have to put a Skull and Crossbones on the card, which is a little
That's
fun
great.
tweak.
That's great.
All right, Mike.
Great. So the next year, and we kind of were touching on this a little bit, right, in terms of that design process. I wanted to talk about design space for the cubes. Specifically for Gavin, talk to me about design space that you have found to be very fruitful for making new cards and for improving cubes.
Yeah, so once again, cube is a kind of unique format in that it is a draftable, constructed format that only has one copy of everything. So one way you can definitely get cards to get in the right zone for being cube playable is to create redundancy. For example, with the most simple example, if we made another version of Little War Elf by a different name, we'll call it Kranstuber Elf. Sounds great name for an elf. I think it's pretty good. Then that would just go in a cube instantly because every one mana elf more or less is going to make a cube most of the time. So an easy way to get cards into cube is create redundancy with identical or similar effects. So Arena Rector, for example, quite different from Academy Rector, but it's still the same kind of power level. You know that it hits. You have a template to work off of. So one way is to model them after existing powerful cards that already make cube. Because if that card made cube, well, this card probably will too.
Yeah.
The other way is to find holes in people's cubes. For example, a request I get all the time, and haven't quite made it yet, but someday you'll probably get one, is very simple. It's a blaze or fireball that deals 1 additional damage, right? So like RX deal X plus 1 damage. It's like blaze isn't quite there in cube. It's like a little under the power level. We want it to get there. And so, okay, but maybe that's someday a card that I would make. And so there's all these like tiny little holes where you can look at mana curves and say, oh, white could use some more cheap creatures. When I was working on Battle Bond, Brightling kind of came from, I was looking at a cube and I was trying to make a cube playable Morphling, because 5 mana 3/3 is not what it used to be. Not that it, like, that's come a long way from Morphling. And so looking at the curve, I was like, should this be a 2 mana card, a 3 mana card, or a 4 mana card? And white is glutted on 2s, And 3 was actually a kind of a dead spot in some cubes. You've got Flicker Wisp, you've got Monastery Mentor, you've got a few other cards, but looking at that mana curve was really, really important. So that's one way, or a few different ways, that we look to try and make this happen.
So one thing that I've noticed is there's a concept in cubing of the on-deck binder, on-deck box, right, where you know, 10 years ago it was maybe 10 pages front and back, and now it's a stack of binders this tall. I mean, there's just so much to choose from in every color, right? So there, you could build a cube that's 2,000 cards large, whereas back in the day you'd be scraping trying to make that work.
Yeah.
And I think something that, as far as finding holes, where I found sort of cards to revitalize and to bring energy to my cube more than anything else is in the cards like WorldNet, or the Drafts Matter cards like Canal Dredger, or Agent Acquisitions. Right. So those cards
Librarian.
are, where you interact with the draft, and so those have been really cool sets. The conspiracy sets have been great. Battle Bond, of course. There's a gentleman in the audience who said he had a 2-headed giant Battle Bond cube, which
I so want to play
awesome,
it.
right?
I so want to play it.
So I love that, you know, as you guys create these sets, we sort of get collateral cube cards just sort of by default as you come up with zany ideas.
Well, and you mentioned conspiracy. That the cube ability of that product was a big selling point for us doing it, actually, because we wanted to create something that would be great for draft. But the problem is that these conspiracies have no life basically outside of draft. You're not going to play
any constructed format.
Like if you ever cast Canal Dredger as a 4-mana 1/5, you might be doing it wrong if you're playing constructed. So the fact that you could port those directly into cube, especially the conspiracies, which have no use outside limited, are banned in everything. That was a huge internal selling point for us in making the product in the first place. And you know, to that end, I think we can also build in archetypes into sets that are like, okay, well, we know enchantments is like on the cusp of getting there in cube. Like people try Enchantress decks as a 2-color archetype, and it never really quite works. Okay, can we make a few more cards for an Enchantress deck that maybe puts it over the top in some cubes? Yeah. And then it's on the cube owner to decide if they want to curate that into their cube or not, but it gives enough tools. Another place I think of is gold cards. For a long time, like a mini 3-color combinations, just you had like almost no good options for your gold cards. And now I think we've mostly filled those out, but there's still a few where it's like, we could use another good teamer card probably here and there, and there's a few spots that are still missing some good options. So that's the thing I was looking at as well, designing gold cards for cube.
Yeah, speaking about color, the next topic I wanted to hit on was color balance, right? It's interesting as the different colors in Magic relate to the different formats. It ends up being that some colors really excel in one format or another. Let's talk about cube and how color balance starts there. Matt, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So there's a few lines of thought around color balance, you know, and when we say color balance, we say, you know, if I run a 540 card cube, I've got 70 cards of each color. I've got exactly 4 cards for each guild, and I've got a wedge card of each type. You know, and it sort of satisfies the need to be able to have balance and symmetry from a design perspective. I'd say I'd also throw in cycles in there, right? So you have 10, 10 dual lands, 10 fetch lands, 10 fast lands, shock lands, right? And when is it appropriate to break those? And so my thought is definitely it's okay to break that balance. If you feel like, gosh, I have a lot more players that want to be drafting multicolored cards, and it feels like they're playing more green than not. You could add a couple more green dual lands and a couple more green gold cards, and you're off to the races. Statistically speaking, over a 500 card cube, bumping up a color 2-3 cards or adding a wedge card here and there, it's not going to break the bank, and I think it'll be largely unnoticeable. So I would say go outside of the box. Do what feels right for your group. If you start finding that you have 3 mono blue players at the table, then pull back your blue cards. It seems like you might have maybe a bit too many.
Great.
So this is somewhere where Matt and I definitely agree that it took me a really long time to feel like I did not have to have in my cube all of the colors exactly balanced. And ultimately, if the goal is to make the best play experience, then you don't need to have every color doesn't need to have exactly 70 cards. There could be one that has 72, there could be one that has 64. And especially when you get to two-colored cards, which is one, coming back on Gavin's comment, I'm always excited to see a Ravnica block because I'm like, yes, more two-color cards that can actually make it into cube. But there are some color combinations, like for a long time, like white and red didn't have a lot of stuff. You didn't have a lot of options. There was just a small number of cards you could choose from, and they were all kind of samey. But then you look at like black-green or like black-white, where you have like a larger number of options, and I think it's okay to lean into those things. If you're trying to make, again, the best experience, that doesn't necessarily mean that everything has to be exactly even. Now, I think one place where we do slightly disagree, Matt, is for me, I always like to make sure that I do have every color combination has access to the same number of dual lands. And for me, this is because even though I'm trying to make specific archetypes, and when I'm designing my cube, like identifying archetypes for like two-color combinations or monocolor combinations or some three-color combinations is really important to me to make sure that the cube functions on a fun level, and when you're drafting, you don't get tricked into drafting something that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and you want your players to be able to play their cards.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So if they draft a really great gold card, but they can't find fixing for it, then they may as well not be in, right?
Exactly. It's not going to have a fun time.
Yeah.
But I always want to make sure, if my land section is 60 cards, and it usually is at least that, because I include tons of non-basic lands in my cube. That's like every cube that I've ever designed has always had a ton of non-basic lands.
Agreed there.
Yeah. A lot of non-basic lands. Fixing is great. But I always, if I have 60, I'm going to have probably 5 cycles. So there's going to be 5 blue-white lands. There's going to be 5 red-green lands. They might not all be from the same cycle, but I'm going to have the same number, because even though I'm trying to create these archetypes, there might be an archetype in a singular draft where the stars align that a drafter is able to kind of create a new archetype or mesh something together. And oftentimes you need good color fixing to do that. So color fixing, specifically with lands, maybe not necessarily as much with signets. I don't think it's as important, kind of like what you were saying with the modern cube, where only one signet was present. I don't think that is quite as important, because decks need, signets do more than just color fix. They also ramp, obviously. So lands, more important to me. Making other colors even, honestly, not that important at all. As long as the experience that your drafters are able to have does not suffer from that, then I think you should definitely explore kind of breaking apart the symmetry, the perfect symmetry of everything.
And I'm going to kind of go and talk about things on the other end of the spectrum, living on the wild side here, which is there are some cubes where you will intentionally want to break color balance. We'll talk maybe a little bit later about different kinds of cubes you can draft. But for example, on Magic Online for a little while, there was the mono blue cube, I think, or the color shifted cube, or something like that I think broke symmetry a little bit. I played a number of cubes that intentionally go up and down certain colors by wild, wild swings. One of the cubes that I own, it's a special place in my heart. I call it the Shambles Cube. And what happened with the Shambles Cube is it was the original cube that people came over to my house to play. And at some point, there were enough cubes that it wasn't a problem anymore. And so I just started pulling cards out of the cube for my commander decks and my modern decks or whatever.
Okay.
And then I just never took the cube apart. So now it's like, it was a 500-ish card cube. Now it's just missing 200 cards or whatever, 150 cards. And you draft, and there's like, 3 of the right dual lands, and like blue is way lower than everything else. And it's like very novel to do that once or twice. But at the end of the day, after you've done it once or twice, you're like, I really want to go back and play normal balanced Magic, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of stuff can be really fun to spike your cube and try something different every now and then. But ultimately, I do think hewing, unless you're trying to go for something really unique, hewing to mostly balance with, a couple cards different here or there will get you the best cube experience.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we have about 10 minutes left, and I wanted to open it up to you, the audience, for questions. So who has the first question for me? Yes, right up front.
So the question is about downshifts, and for pauper and peasant cubes, downshifts are really, really important because they allow you to put cards in your cubes that wouldn't normally go there. So personally, as a designer, downshifting cards I'm totally fine with. Our general rule for Commander is we print the card at whatever rarity it was previously, with a couple exceptions here and there. Usually we don't downshift rare to uncommon, for example, in a Commander set, so you won't see it that often in Commander. In Master sets is where that really, really happens, and we definitely think about that. At the end of the day, making sure that the Master's limited environment plays well is more important than making sure that Pauper gets a card or something like that sometimes. But we do think about it and consider it and try and make that happen where possible. So it's one of those things where if it works for the draft format and it's good for Pauper Peasant, both cubes and otherwise, let's just do it and make that decision. So personally, if I'm building a Peasant or Pauper cube, I have no problem including downshifts. To me, that's a thing that we did, so it's uncommon now. Go nuts with it. I don't know if you two have any different feelings about that.
For me, when I'm building cubes, I'm more focused on power level of cube, and I think Pauper and Peasant is really it's kind of a good like line in the sand for the type of power level you want. But I mean, ultimately, when you look at it, Lightning Bolt is a common. It's more powerful than most rares, right? So it's like, we have a Peasant cube where we just have commons, and there's Lightning Bolt in it. Well, sure. I mean, it's a common, but you know what you're getting from a power level perspective. So for me, that is more important, but I think a lot of people do like to have that constraint of this is a common, only commons go in this cube, only commons and uncommons, etc. And I think that's good because I think, having those restrictions does make for a more fun experience, especially in the designing phase. A lot of times your drafters aren't going to know the difference. Like if you put a low power level cube in front of them, they're not going to be like, well, what rarities are in this cube? But Matt, do you have anything else?
So I think let's go on. Who has another question for our cube panelists? Yes. So the question there was, what's a big mistake that you made when you started building cubes? Matt, you want to talk about that one?
It's a deep question that I don't have a canned answer for.
I've got one I can say if you need to.
Okay, yeah, let's send it over to Gavin.
Save me, Gavin. Thank you.
No problem. Mine is including too many pet cards no one would ever play with. It happens a lot. You're like, I'm going to build my cube. I've got my Master Core all lined up or whatever. And now I'm going to put in all these cards that I love. And you're like, well, I love this card. So clearly everyone's going to play with it or whatever, right? And it turns out that's not how it works. Like if your cube is a lot more powerful than that card that you put in, it's going to get drafted 14th to 15th pick. It's not going to go into anyone's decks, and it's just going to look kind of sad at the end of the day. For example, I had Goblin King in one of my early cubes. Because there's enough goblins. You're drafting your mono red deck, and you slam down your Goblin King, and you're like, oh, maybe it works. But realistically, you're never putting Goblin King in your mono red deck. It's not going to happen, right? Yeah. So that's one that I think about a lot. Is like including pet cards. Now there are some cubes with restrictions, but keep in mind that the power level of your cube is often dictated by the top end cards in your cube. Those are the really swingy ones that are going to make big differences, like Lightning Bolt, which you mentioned, right? A lot of Pauper and Peasant cubes, while I enjoy playing them, I find often just turn into removal and 2-for-1 fests, because it's like,
they're get ahead on card advantage.
Right, there are all these cards that draw you 2 cards, and I'm going to kill off all your dirty little creatures, right? So the power level is dictated by the top end of these cards a lot of the time. And so if you're playing a powered cube and you're including Goblin King in it, well, I'm sorry, Goblin King, but you're not getting off the bench.
I always am sad when people ask why compulsion is in this cube. It's like, what do you mean, why is compulsion in this cube?
Card rules.
That's all.
So I would say mine is a little bit different in that I think I maybe regret sort of the feedback loop for giving feedback to people on their cubes early on when I was cubing, because I would just look at a card and say, nah, that card's trash, right? And not put it in the full context of the cube. So from a feedback perspective, I've started to look at it a lot more. Instead of looking at it in a vacuum, you have to understand the full environment. You have to understand the full context in which these drafters play. And I think very early on I was very dismissive of that, and so it probably prevented me from adding a lot of really cool stuff to my cube, because I just assumed, those cards are bad, and they should feel bad for playing them, and yeah.
I feel like with game design, a kind of a secret to game design, a lot of people think it's about making cards better or worse. Yeah. But to me, that's actually not what it's about. It's about crafting this play environment. Like, a lot of times a player will be like, hey, did you know this card would have been stronger if it cost 1 less mana? And I'm like, yes. Yes, I did know that. I could intuit that. Thank you very much. But it's really about Open Fire costs 3 mana because we wanted to create, even though it's the effect of Lightning Bolt, because for the format we were crafting, we needed this effect at that mana cost.
Yep.
And you're crafting this overall format. So when you're building a cube, sometimes you can put in a weird card as an inclusion if it fits the overall picture you're trying to create. And there are many, many cards that are great examples of that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to like to thank everyone who came out today for the panel. We have an awesome panel coming up starting at noon Eastern Time. I believe, Gavin, you're moderating Tales from Dominaria. Who's going to be joining you?
It's Ethan Fleischer and Melissa DeTora.
Yeah, so
and all of you!
So, it was such a beloved set. I think that'll be a really great panel. Also, like we mentioned before, you can be playing Cube. Hopefully you were watching us and listening to us while you're playing Cube on Magic Online. And later this weekend on Sunday morning Eastern Time, we will be streaming the Legacy Cube draft, where players from Gen Con who are qualifying all weekend long will draft a Legacy Cube. And not only do they get to draft it, but they get to keep the cards. So unlike unlike every other cube where you have to return the cards back to the owner when it's done, which is very important.
Not playing burn then, right?
That's Well,
I drafted
hopefully
this crazy
it's
5-color deck with all these dual lands.
Yeah, that would be a strong strategy. And also they get to try to qualify for the Mythic Championship through that. So that's incredibly exciting. But once again, thank you all for coming out. You guys are what makes Magic so awesome. And I hope you guys have a great Gen Con who are here, and hope you guys have fun drafting on Magic Online and playing Magic. Thank you guys so much.
You're great.